Hello and welcome to our panel discussion, Playing History, Tackling Europe's Past with Video Games. We are very happy that you have joined us for an event that is perfect fit for our initiative, as it addresses an international topic that concerns all of us, beyond borders, and yet had a very specific effects in each country we will hear from today. To talk about this topic, we have invited visionary game developers who have decided to allow their players to step into very dark periods of Europe's past and experience history through unique storytelling and gameplay mechanics. As I already know, it would be very hard to fit this discussion into our allotted time frame. I will quickly move on by thanking our parent network, MediaNet Berlin-Brandenburg, whose focus goes beyond our industry by connecting Berlin's and Brandenburg's media, digital, and startup industry, for hosting our initiative. GamesNet Berlin Europe is funded by the European Union's European Regional Development Fund and the State of Berlin, namely the Senate Department of Economics, Energy, and Public Enterprises, through its program for internationalization. If you want to learn more about our initiative, I invite you to visit our website at gamesnetberlin.eu to find our newsletter and join us for upcoming online events or listen to our new podcast that recently started with our first guest, Rami Ismail. And now, please welcome our host and veteran games journalist, Andreas Garbe, who will lead the discussion and introduce our amazing panelists.
Yes, hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to my Frankfurt, Germany living room. Welcome to wherever you are in these weird and unusual times. Thank you ever so much for joining our discussion. I'm very sure that we will very much make it worth your while. We have 1.5 hours allotted to the topic of video games tackling Europe's past. And Florian, thank you so much for the introduction. Florian said it already. We have 3 outstanding game developers and very much look forward to their insight. Let me briefly introduce them in a second. First of all, let me please say that we very much welcome your participation in our panel discussion in this webinar. So please use either the chat function to chat to everyone or the question and answer function here on Zoom, and we will go through the questions as we sort of see fit as they join, match up with our discussion. So now let me introduce our 3 outstanding game developers and panelists as they are welcome. Catharina Bøhler, co-founder of Sarepta Studios from Hamar in Norway. And you probably know her best for her mobile game, My Child Lebensborn. Welcome Vít Šisler, co-founder of Charles Games from Prague, Czech Republic, mainly for Attentat 1942. The first of a trilogy of games coming up. And welcome Jörg Friedrich, co-founder of Paintbucket Games in Berlin, Germany, responsible for the video game Through the Darkest of Times. Very warm welcome to all 3 of you. Thank you ever so much that you made the time and you could be here. Before we start and everyone shares a little about their projects and we show trailers as well, I would like to start with a question for all 3 of you, with a very brief answer, if you may. We've got movies, books, graphic novels, all different types of media that tackle historical topics, even difficult historical topics, not just for years, but for decades and even hundreds of years, as is the case when it comes to books. So why do you think are we here discussing video games? What makes video games so special? Why do apparently some people don't trust video games to be a medium that can adequately and respectfully, tactfully tackle history? Why exactly is it that we are here talking about video games being a medium for this? Starting with Catharina, please, if you want.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I think, combining all these amazing mediums that already exist and adding in player participation, I see no reason why that wouldn't work also for important and difficult topics. Of course, there's an added challenge in the fact that there's someone there that you can't control, but I think that's also the reason why this becomes so impactful.
Excellent. Vít, what's your opinion? Why are video games usually singled out and talked about, whether it is an adequate medium to represent history when books and movies frequently do so?
Well, I believe video games are a great medium for telling stories, even the most intimate or even the most like traumatic stories from human lives. And I think like what for previous generations, books and movies were typically the medium for popular history. That's the medium where you kind of get the idea how history looked after you leave school, after you don't stop kind of studying history. You typically get most historical information from in previously books and movies. And I think now more and more this popular medium, or this medium for popular history, is video games.
Excellent. And finally, Jörg, what's your take on this?
There's not much to add. That's all. I would agree to all of that. Yes, video games are a very strong and powerful medium because they let people make their own choices, and having people make their own choices in a historical setting, even if it's a dramatic setting, just increases, I think, what you can learn from that compared to books or movies. And I think the only reason, because the other part of the, maybe I can answer to the other part of the question, which was why are people worried that video games might not be the right medium for it? And I think this is simply because it's a young, fresh, and a new medium, and people haven't seen it yet. I think that we had the same troubles with movies back in the day for some topics, and yeah, there just need to be good examples out there, and then people will realize, don't doubt that anymore.
Absolutely. So I think there are really two aspects that you've all mentioned. One is the interactivity of the medium, which really makes it stand apart from other more traditional media. And then it's the fact that video games are still fairly new, with about a good 40 years of commercial video games. I suppose we can sum it up now. Excellent. Well, thanks. That's a great start. Let's have a look at each one of sort of the studio's games that your studios are known for, that really sort of stand out. You're all currently working on new projects. But I think it's important to really focus on the recent projects that you bring to the table. And starting with Catharina, please, we would love to hear a little bit more about your mobile game available on iOS and Android. At least it should be. At the moment, there are some problems. We will discuss them later. But please tell us a little bit about your game, My Child Lebensborn, and also while you introduce it in a few sentences, we can see the trailer in the background, so you get like a grasp of the images as well, of the visuals.
Yeah. So My Child Lebensborn is it's a nurture game where you take care of a child, but it's based off the stories of the Lebensborn children that grew up after the Second World War. So these were children born of war, born of Norwegian women and German soldiers. And because of the anger that came from the war, these kids were ostracized. And so in this game, it's actually a documentarist game where we are taking the stories of Lebensborn children that we've talked to, and we put their stories into this game, and your goal is just to be a force for good. When no one else is taking care of the child, you're there to take care of the child. And that's the main goal of the game. And so you get to experience both what was going on with these people and how, adults could treat children. But it's also very important parenting simulation game where you are kind of challenged on some things that are quite difficult. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you so much. What I find very interesting about your game is you focused on an unusual part. I mean, having decided that you would focus on the Nazi occupation of Norway, and particularly the aftermath. It's interesting to me that you focus on a part that is perhaps even to most people a little known aspect, the Lebensborn program, and also what your game shows is really the aftermath of the war, how people treated those children, half Germans, but of course innocent, because I mean they had no knowledge of what went on during the war. And they certainly had no fault in it. So why did you choose to focus on an issue that also really focuses on Norwegians, sort of like, and their animosities against Germans, Norwegians becoming not just being victims, but also being perpetrators, and sort of relieving their anger at Germans and targeting these children which were innocent. I mean, you know, the Nazi atrocities in Norway were awful, were abhorrent. It would have been very easy to focus on that aspect and to have a clear-cut picture of where the guilt lies, of where the evil lies. So you opted for a much more a nuanced topic.
Yeah. So I mean, our studio does, like, our vision is to work with emotionally impactful games and things that can make you feel. But this whole story and topic was quite a lucky accident in a way, because we do a lot of networking here in the inland, and there's actually a production company called Technopilot who were helping producing a documentary about the children born of war. And our partner Elin Feste, she's always been interested in technology, and she was a bit frustrated that, yes, we're making this great documentary, but these stories are shocking and they're, you know, hurtful, and not something many people know about in Norway. So she was thinking, like, there has to be something else we can do than only having a documentary in the cinema about old people talking about the war. There's no way we're going to make any difference, any change there. So she also already started kind of this transmedia idea and project. And we met at an event, and I started, like, helping her out a little bit, some thoughts around the transmedia. And then later on, she just contacted me and said, hey, do you guys want to try and see if we can make a game of this? And I think one of the main reasons why we said yes was because it was really shocking to us as well. That, hey, this is not something we've learned about. And yeah, we just felt like, okay, these stories have to be told.
Very interesting that you should sort of, like, if for want of a better word, piggyback on top of a television documentary and sort of like bring that topic into an interactive medium, which I think works very well. You've I believe your game won a BAFTA award, so that really is one of the biggest honors a video game can receive. What is interesting is that I believe your main target group would be Norwegians, but then, you know, it did also aim to reach Europeans in general. What you told me when we spoke before, you said it was also rather unlikely. It was extremely successful in Asia, in Korea, and in China, I believe.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Do you have any explanation for it? And just how successful was it?
Well, I mean, we hadn't even really translated the game. Someone cracked and translated it for us, and suddenly, in one day, we had like 8,000 downloads and purchases in China, which theoretically are people that are not willing to pay for things, because this is a premium game. But yeah, I think we have a little bit more than 2 million users of the game, while over half of them are from China. And we did kind of try to ask around a little bit, and what the Chinese say themselves is, we love to cry. Basically, I mean, sure, they find this, like, the story part interesting, and the fact that it's connected to history, but just the fact that they got to get this very emotional experience through a mobile game, and that mobile is their largest platform. So I think, like, the combination of being able to play a mobile game that also, I mean, it attracts kids as well. So it really reaches out to a more casual audience, and then the fact that they could also have this really deep experience seemed to really hit the target with them.
Excellent. Also, and at this point, I would like to open it up to all three panelists, please. You opted to tell the story through the eyes of a child, which obviously fits the topic at hand. But I think that's generally a very good perspective to tell history through, because a child is a clean slate, is someone who has not yet, doesn't carry any blame or fault in the status quo, in the history as it turned out in the past. What do you three think? Is that sort of like tackling a historical context through the eyes of a child? Is that in general a good idea, a good way forward?
I personally think it kind of depends on the story you're trying to tell. For me, gameplay is such an important thing for telling a story, because when you do actions, it makes you feel something. For us, it fitted more because we were trying to tell the stories of these kids. But yeah, that's just my personal.
I think showing the life of a child, or the day-to-day life of a child in a historical context is a very impactful way, and it definitely works on an emotional basis, which is something where games are strong at. And it definitely worked for me, by the way. I found the game really impactful and emotional, and yeah, so I believe that works. It doesn't show the world from the eyes of a child, though. It shows the life of a child from the eyes of a parent, which works for me because I am a parent, and I think it relates to a lot of people, because a lot of people are either parents or will be parents one day, or can relate to being a parent, because it's just such a human thing. So I think it can be a very good vehicle to tell the story.
I mean, we did actually have some thoughts initially also about, oh, well, maybe you should play as a kid going through these things. But yeah, definitely the being a parent, seeing someone else experience it, and desperately wanting to try to protect them without being able to, was so incredibly impactful. And it's actually worse for fathers with young kids. Like all the target audiences, the fathers that have young kids, a lot of them were not able to finish the game either. So.
Absolutely. Having a child myself, having a son, has really changed my life as well, of course, and particularly sensitized me a lot when I watch movies or play games that sort of like center on children being mistreated. I'm far more sensitive now that I have a child myself. Absolutely. What reception have you had from the Norwegian society? Because I mean, it's a difficult game to stomach, because you know, the unspeakable Nazi atrocities, obviously, as the catalyst for this whole situation. Your game portrays Norwegians as perpetrators as well, as you know, as mistreating children, perhaps somehow understandably so, because there's these German animosities, but you must have had some negative or critical comments as well, simply because of the difficult, nuanced message that the game is sending.
Actually, from Norwegians, I have not received anything negative. Only praise. Only, you know, saying, "Oh, thank you for putting this topic into, you know, the public." Received a couple of like people who were just because they just read, you know, the word Nazi and they get frustrated, and so I had a couple of people that I had to kind of talk down, but they were Americans actually. So in the Norwegian society, or yeah, all we've gotten is support, and even, you know, the government that we kind of criticize here as well, like top government officials are also praising the game. And yeah, I think we're very open to being hated on a bit and actually owning up to some of the stuff that we've done.
Well, let's turn to the second game and sort of take all the topics that we're discussing along into a more general discussion later. So Vít, if we can turn to you and have a look at your game. Your game, Attentat 1942, is the first game of a trilogy. So you have also opted to not just center on the Nazi atrocities committed in the Czech Republic and in Eastern Europe, but you also sort of continue the story to the aftermath, what happened afterwards, and even into the rise of communism in the third game. Focusing, of course, on Attentat. Please introduce the game a little, the reception and sort of the ideas that went into the game, the message that you're trying to portray, while again we have a look at the trailer.
Thanks really for being invited to this awesome panel. Attentat 1942 is an adventure narrative game in which essentially portrays the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia through the eyes of different civilians. We collaborate with professional historians, so the game is based on real historical research and authentic testimonies, but of course we created for the game, we created fictitious stories and fictitious characters, but they are very much, I would say, historically accurate. And the game is kind of like a detective story. You play the game from present time, and the present time is 2001. That was on purpose because in 2001 you can still talk to people who lived through the war. And you discover that your grandfather was arrested by Gestapo and sent to concentration camp after the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, who was a high-ranking Nazi official and one of the leading architects of the Holocaust. And your grandpa survived. He actually returned from the camp after the war, but he never kind of talked much why he was arrested. What has it to do with, for example, resistance movements and the assassination itself? And you try to, and he's now in the hospital, he's in a coma, he doesn't speak much when the game is happening. And you try to discover what exactly happened by talking to your grandma, by talking to your neighbors, to his friends, colleagues, etc., etc. And the game essentially shows you his story from very different perspectives. So it shows you very personal, very intimate take on his story. So kind of, you talk to people who've been in the resistance movement, but you also talk to people who, in a way, kind of collaborated with the occupying Nazi regime. You talk to various people of various ethnicities and people of various political and historical background, and each of them gives you slightly different evaluation of the past, different kind of evaluation of what happened. And you have to very critically go through these personal testimonies and figure out kind of what happened. And as you said, the game is the first one in a series. So we are now working on a sequel, which is called Soboda 1945 Liberation. And it's a game about the liberation of Czechoslovakia from Nazism, and also about the events which happened immediately after the war. So we are talking about the expulsion of Sudeten Germans. They were like German-speaking Czechoslovak citizens were expelled from Czechoslovakia after the war. So we have these memories, and also we have memories of rise of communists to power, the seizure of power, the putsch in 1948, and the forced collectivization of farmlands when the communists took the lands from farmers and kind of force them to join the collective farm. So the second game is set in a small village in the Czech-German borderland. And there is a third game in the pipeline, which should be about Prague Spring and essentially, the communist times and the so-called normalization in the 70s. But it's this kind of still in the pipeline.
So, but looking at the trilogy as a whole, the way you conceived it right from the start, again, you've opted for this very nuanced message. I mean, it would have been very easy to focus on the horrible, on these unspeakable Nazi atrocities committed in the Czech Republic, but you chose to employ, like, the acts of evil committed against the Sudeten Germans in the wake of the liberation. So why did you opt for this nuanced message the same way that that Catharina did with her game?
I think the most important reason why we did that is that one is the kind of we call it polyphony or multi-perspective. It's the different views and different points that you can see the same historical event from very different lenses, from individual position of a very different actor. And I think what is oftentimes missed in, for example, even in history classes, you kind of tend to perceive history as a list of dates and important events. And with our games, we really wanted to show the human stories, that they are real people, living behind these events, who, for example, in our games, we actually have the same people in the first two games. Some of them are the same characters, because many of them actually lived through this whole second half of the 20th century. So those are people who lived both through Nazi occupation, then liberation, communist times, and they lived till the revolution. And their memories is their lifespan is actually kind of covers the whole second half of 20th century. And this, I think, is often lost when you think about history. You think about history as something distant and given, something definite. And in our game, we wanted to show that there are personal stories behind it, and also histories made by very concrete decisions by very concrete people. It's actually your decisions which make history.
And I very much find very much interesting the way that you chose to visualize the story. So on one hand, you have some kind of a graphic novel type illustration. And on the other, you have, as you already mentioned, you have actors portraying eyewitnesses and giving their eyewitness accounts. The eyewitness accounts, I believe, are all real, but they're spoken by actors who sort of fit the role. So you have real life footage, and you have the appearance of a comic book, of a graphic novel. Was that intentionally to not make the video game look like what people think a video game looks like? Was that the idea, to sort of just make it look like some different type of media?
No, actually, that was not. That's a really good question. That was not our aim from the beginning. In the very beginning, in the very early stage of we have various prototypes, and we were even thinking about classical 3D game, using, for example, Unreal Engine or some different engine. And when we started to do some tests and to do some first prototypes, it clearly became apparent that if you want to, for example, use 3D graphics, then in order it looked kind of lame, having 3D characters talking about Nazi occupation, talking about their memories from the camps, or talking about, I don't know, the communist times. It was kind of weird. So I think it can be great if you have really a huge budget and you made really, almost real life 3D modeling. Then probably, yeah. But in our case, it looked just it was very uncanny. It was very inauthentic. So we are experimenting with comics, with graphic novel, which since Spiegelman and Maus, we know that's the medium capable of communicating very powerful, most intimate and even traumatic messages and experiences. So and we have quite a history of historical graphic novel in Czech Republic. So we teamed with some great graphic illustrators. And we did some testing, and it actually the original idea was that we will have like just a graphic novel with voiceovers, with actors, you know, narrating the story. And we just tried to film them during, you know, the interview, how it will feel. And it felt much better. It was much more personal, authentic, and like really like you had the feeling that you are really sitting face to face to this eyewitness and talking to them. So we opted for that, even like really low budget, and I think they made amazing job. Just one note: these are actually not actual factual memories. They are fictions, but they are written by historians, but they are based on real historical research and real memories. So typically, in our character combines, for example, 2 or 3, you know, different memories, sometimes even more. So like we kind of created I would say, fictitious assemblage of authentic memories. But all the dialogues were written and designed by historians from the Czech Academy of Sciences. So it's kind of great. It's not real. It's not real.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. And it's very interesting what you said, that you had the feeling that 3D characters did not feel sort of appropriate for this historical context. All 3 of your games that you're sort of bringing to the table today do not have proper classical 3D visuals. So Jörg and Catharina, was that something that very early on in the development process of your respective games, was that something that you realized early on that you would not opt for a 3D environment, but for, in your cases, a sort of like a stylized 2D look, which could be an illustration to a children's book or to a youth book?
For us, very much, yes. It was very clear. I mean, when we started out with this project, we were 2 people, Sebastian and myself. So it was very clear. And Sebastian is the only one who's able to do art. So it was only one. So it was very clear that we wouldn't be, well, first of all, wouldn't be able, and we needed a look that we could pull off with that small team. But then also, I think, and I also, our game is very text heavy partially for the same reason, but also because I think we wanted intentionally to leave parts to the player's imagination and have them fill the gaps in their imagination of what's happening, and not showing every detail, but leaving blanks, and that works with the look we chose as well.
Yeah, and for us, I mean, for us, it really started with, okay, what story do we want to tell, but what's our platform and who's our audience? And we knew that, okay, well, we do want to be able to reach younger and older audiences, and we're trying to figure out, well, okay, for younger audiences, it's going to have to be mobile. So again, it kind of narrows into it. And then we were looking at the different concept, and initially, the game was supposed to be 45 minutes long. So it could fit within one classroom setting. Yeah, that didn't happen. So the initial game, it started out as a very small concept of, okay, we wanted this really small, rough, like Tamagotchi style game. And I think that's where the graphics came from as well. But as we continued working with it, we started realizing that the simplicity of the drawings also did a lot, because, you know, the way that the body language of the kid works just works really well with this type of style. And I think, yeah, as Vít said, like, if you want something to be super expressive, but you don't have the biggest budget, then actually using 2D, and also 2D, yeah, it's so much more, it can be so much more artistic, that leaving, you know, a lot to the imagination. So I think those things combined just makes it really, really great. But of course, budget has also been a thing for us.
Excellent. Thank you for your for your insight there. I think maybe a video game that does not look like a classical video game, or what people usually perceive as a video game, might also help societal acceptance. You know, people who aren't gamers, when they come across a game that tackles difficult topics such as your 3 games do, it might be easier to accept that they should be allowed to tackle a historical subject like that. If it's not the sort of classical 3D photorealistic look of video games. We have a question for Vít here from Rüdiger Brandes. I'll just read it out aloud in case like not everyone has the Q&A window open. Vít, you mentioned both authenticity and accuracy. Why do you think there are instances that are important for a historical game? What do you think these are important instances? And related to the question for everyone, how would you describe history and its function in general? And how did this view on history influence your game design? That's a big question to answer, I suppose. But Vít, let's start with you.
Yeah, I will start like the question of authenticity was really very crucial for us in the beginning, or historical accuracy. And we actually had 4 historians from the Institute of Contemporary History from the Czech Academy of Sciences on board. And in the beginning, I would say they were quite skeptical towards the medium of video games. Like they were quite skeptical. Exactly, I think their general feeling was that video games are inherently medium which tends to schematize history, because you have to kind of break the very complex historical reality into rule system, into like decisions which you can either lose or win. And we kind of persuaded them that games are very broad medium, and you have like tons of different games, and you can simply make a game which is based not on which is like heavy based on narrative, and where there's space for really all the nuances and details. And I think when we are like kind of deciding between what will be better for accuracy or better for gameplay, we had like really very long and heated discussions between game designers, including me, and historians. And every time we found a solution, but these discussions were really long. And oftentimes we discovered that there's a problem, like not necessarily with the schematization itself, but with the fact that historians typically work with text, with this textual material. And oftentimes they told us like, we can't do this scene as you want it, not because it couldn't happen that way, but because we can't tell you how to draw it or how these details look like, because we have no material, and we can't guarantee it's real. So sometimes we change some details or change the settings. So typically we can use a scene which is well documented, even visually. And oftentimes the graphic novel aspect helped us a lot in these details. Exactly as Jörg said, that graphic novel lets you to leave blank spaces. Like you don't need to draw everything. You can just you can have like things which are blurred or not really there, and let the player imagine, or the player's imagination fill out the details, which helped us a lot, I would say.
Excellent, thank you. And then to everyone, the question, how your view of history and its function, how that influences or influenced your game design in those in the prominent cases we've just discussed.
Well, for me, I mean, history itself, obviously there is certain things that you need to know and that are, accepted and acknowledged by everyone. This is something that happened, and this is, but at the same time, yeah, history is also a compilation of personal stories of what people experienced. And yeah, I think making sure, like, we had several things that we needed to look at. We did things in several layers. One layer was, of course, what actually happened around that time, and we're looking at statistics of cost of things and how things were done and what type of items you had back then and stuff like that. We also like included newspapers and clippings and things so that you could like kind of read from what happened back then. But then also combining kind of the general knowledge of what people should know in this journal that you could read yourself, but then not having that be the most important things. Like, okay, if you want to learn, if you want to understand the setting and what's going on here, then you can read this. But if you just care about like the personal story and what's happening here and now, then you could also focus on the child. So I think it's like this lovely, chaotic, like artistic thing that keeps being pulled back and shaped by history, and it's just kind of a great creative way to work with like creative aspects as well, kind of being hindered all the time by things that are historical and needing to find different solutions for what you want to do.
Yeah, for us, we see history as something, or we saw when we looked at history and making a historical game, we said like, okay, in most games, and also when you go to school and learn about history, you learn about like these big events, and then it also always looks like there's like this chain of events, of things that happens. This caused this, and this caused this, and so on. And you can look at this if it's once it's over, right? That's when that's the time when you can write history and say like, okay, this is the chain of events, and this leads to that. However, when you're in the middle of it, you don't know what is historical or what will be historical and what isn't. And yeah, as Katharina says, there's all these personal events that add to it. If you're not a politician or a king or a general, then usually the choices you make have no big historical impact for others. Yet they might have a huge personal impact for you. And this is something that we tried to condense and damp in and show in the game by making this like small choices really feel important, and also give players, which is kind of a contradiction, was a very hard thing, and I don't know if we succeeded, give players sometimes the feeling whether they don't know whether what they do might actually have a historical impact in a bigger way or not, if it will make big waves or not. And because that's what we think how people must have felt, resistance fighters back then must have felt back then, right? They didn't know whether their actions would lead to anything, if it makes any sense to do this. And they still did it and risked their lives. And that was something that we tried to convey through the mechanics.
One thing we did with our mechanics is that when it comes to the historical aspect, it's a bit of a spoiler, but you cannot change what happens to the kid no matter what. All you can change is how you work with the kid on what's happened as well. And I think that's kind of important. Like, it makes it difficult to, playing with history in a sense. So I think we have kind of somewhat of the same view.
Yeah, that's a very important aspect and probably a huge obstacle to including history in video games, that video games usually offer people the choice. And if you tackle something like the Nazi reign over Europe and the Nazi atrocities, say the Holocaust, it would seem sort of emotionally, it would seem to me to be almost not sort of like accepting them if you gave people the choice to avoid them. So maybe that's something that video games should stay clear of like changing history and sort of like the big picture. Is that what you three all feel and agree on, that sort of the big picture of history must be unchanged, and perhaps individual biographies can be influenced by the player while the historical facts are set in stone? Do you agree?
I mean,
yeah, Jörg, go ahead.
That was pretty much the design decision we made, right? That is what we did. This is how the game works. The individual decisions, they are there. You can make choices, and you can save this person or that person, or you can maybe can even make an attack that didn't really happen, but you can never change like the big flow of history. However, and this is what we stick to. However, we did have discussions with historians and with history teachers who told us like, why do you do this? Why do you do this? Why don't you go for contrafactual branchings here or there, or add an alternate mode where this would happen, because for us to teach history, this might be even more useful, because we could point out, look, this is where it went different, and it went different because, and these are the reasons why it went the way it did. And that was very interesting discussion, and a learning for me as well, to get to the point where, as I said earlier, we see history as this chain of cause and effect. However, it doesn't need to be this way. It's often also almost random, it could have gone so, something slightly different might have happened, and everything might have changed. So this is also, that's something that is interesting to look at. And it also, when you look at history this way, I feel like it gives you even more power nowadays to look at things like, and don't give up hope, but basically say like, hey, maybe we can change stuff, even though it looks unlikely.
For our game, it was a very similar approach. We decided from the very beginning that in our game, you can't change history. So you don't replay history, and you don't make decisions which will alter the course of things. Whereas the game is happening in the present, where you talk to people, and depending whom you approach and how you frame the question, you will get different. They will behave differently towards you. So, for example, there are eyewitnesses who can shut the door and stop talking to you, or tell you different stuff because they don't trust you, etc., etc. So it's more about unearthing different layers of history and digging through different perspectives. And depending on how you play the game, how you decisions you make, you get to different layers of the story, but you can't really change the history as it is. And yeah, it was particularly because of kind of like piety, because of the topic we are dealing with, including the Holocaust. But like I second Jörg, there's very interesting phenomenon where many teachers who opted to use the game in history classes told us, you can do that. We would welcome if in your game you can change history, because it's real powerful for educational purposes. And I frankly think you can do it. I think you can have a game dealing with even that heavy topic, which allows you to change history. But the biggest problem there is if you talk about individual level, if you talk about individual story, then it's really hard to make the rule system what you do and what would be the effect without really schematizing the memories, because then in the game logic, it's kind of that if you do that, or if you do that, this will be the result. And it kind of can show you that, for example, the experience in the camps is something you can game, you can make choices which that you can manage it properly, which I think can be almost offensive to many people. So I think the kind of letting players change history works, and it's my personal opinion, works much better on the macro level, on a broader level, where you talk, for example, about system, about systematic oppression, or about systematic features. Then this can be more easily broken to rule system. Individual life is, I would say, not easy to break into ifs and to do's.
For us, we I think that a lot of I love games that also just kind of go, you know what? No, let's just change history and see what happens. I just think it's important for people to know it. Like, for instance, when I watch a movie and I feel like, oh, this is based on something, I have to go on Wikipedia to figure out, wait, what was true and what wasn't true. But for us, our main goal was to tell the stories of some very specific people. And that's why also for us, as you say, you can't change anything, because then you're suddenly saying to victims that, oh, if you just done this differently, this wouldn't have happened to you. So that just couldn't happen at all. And we had to, but I think that's great, because then you get, a challenge that makes you look at things differently, and you can try to create new types of games, which I feel all of us here have done.
Excellent, thanks. David from the audience already called called you out for spoilers, Catharina. So now we've spoiled all three games, saying that the large part of history won't be change, but I think that's an important learning here. So thank you all. We should turn to the third and last game, so we can sort of use those three examples that you bring to the table to further our discussion. We have some additional questions by Fiona and Alexander. Thank you so much. But we'll get to them after the presentation of your game, Jörg. I think it's important that we should have all three games and be able to talk about them after having seen them. So, Jörg, your game is called Through the Darkest of Times, and it is a game that actually takes place in the during the Nazi times in Germany, and it's about the resistance. And I think for us, Jörg, you and I, we are Germans. I think the when we tackle the subject, one of the key questions that that Germans think about, certainly I think about, is what would we have done had we lived in those times? And it would, to me, it would almost seem arrogant to say that, yes, of course I would have been a member of the resistance and I would have stood up, and I would not have sort of gone along with it and tolerated these Nazi atrocities. I think it's very easy to say. So that's why I think your game, to me particularly, is extremely important, because you're able to play as the resistance. So those are just my personal thoughts. Through the Darkest of Times, so just sum it up briefly, how you got to develop it, what it's about, what the message is, and we'll see another trailer for it as well.
Yeah, and Through the Darkest of Times, you play a civilian resistance fighter in Berlin from 1933, when Hitler comes into power, to 1945, when Germany loses the war, if you make it so far. And it's a strategy game mixed with a lot of narrative parts and some roguelike elements. Roguelike elements means that certain parts of the game are procedurally generated, so they are kind of random. And that is in particular the characters, the characters, the people the character you play yourself, the resistance fighter you play, and the people in your group and the supporters. And that means they have different attributes and backgrounds, and that also means that the game is always slightly different. And this was, when you play it, this was important to us, because we wanted to kind of convey how these people must have felt, at least as good as we could in a computer game. And that meant that the game should feel hard, that it should feel tough to do this, that it sometimes should feel meaningless, or you would wonder why you would even do this, why would you even go on, can you even change something, and that it would introduce you to all these like little micro stories on the way, you know, like personal ones. So we tell a little bit about where you live in your neighborhood, what your neighbors do, and then there is the group, which, as I said, are different people, so they have different stories as well. And you meet with these groups; they are becoming they're your friends, and they tell you what is going on in their life. So you have like a bigger outlook into the world, not just from a pure strategic standpoint of managing the group and saying like, okay, we need these resources so we can produce more flyers, so we can gain more supporters, so we get more donations, and all of this is in as well. But we wanted to mix this strong narrative elements with the strategic elements, so that you feel like every strategic decision that you make in the game, you're not only playing numbers, but basically there's something more behind it. There might be a human fate behind it, and it might be really making it a tougher decision, basically. Yeah.
If I can just butt in there, you describing sort of the more sort of adventure elements and the more strategic elements. Why did you opt for strategic elements at all? Because I believe the sort of like a classical adventure genre would have been the obvious choice. Strategy is something where you strive for efficiency, and as you described, you need resources. So it's a very sort of how can I put it? A very level-headed element that you're bringing into the game, into a topic which obviously is extremely emotional. So why this strategic take, even though it's only part of what your game is about?
Well, because it was supposed to be replayable. Because for me, a game about these civilian resistance groups needed to include that most of these resistance groups would not survive or persist as groups until 1945. That was an important part for the game, that you would not reach the end of the war, that you would either be arrested yourself, be killed, your group dissolves, or you simply give up because you can't stand it anymore. So this is an important game mechanic as well, that your group gives up at one point because there's this constant pressure and they can't deal with it anymore. And so in order to do this, so this would have been with a pure narrative part, this would have been really hard, right? Because you cannot like then having all these narrative events mix them up. And then there's this other part which I like about games. I like games that when it feels like I'm being clever, I'm making a clever choice, I'm figuring out a system, and I'm trying to deal with strategic elements, like, okay, I still have enough, I don't have enough paper to make this big political action next week. I could send out someone, but we also need someone to help with his family. So which choice do I have? I have this like lots of like small choices that are not all of them. They are not pre-designed, right? They just happen during the game mechanics, and that is something I think where games can be very strong. And and especially if it's mixed with narrative bits, can be very powerful.
We have questions piling up, and I would like to take a moment to thank you all for your great participation. Just bear with me because, let's like get through some last questions, particularly regarding Through the Darkest of Times. What a lot of the German press focused on, and I should mention here as well, as you saw it in the trailers, not just My Child Lebensborn is won a lot of accolades and awards, but the other two games as well, you saw it as part of the trailers. So the media focused particularly, Jörg, on the aspect that your game, the demo to your game, I believe originally, was the very first computer game that was allowed in Germany to use swastikas. If you watched the trailer with an eagle eye, you noticed that the SA soldier's uniform was missing the swastika. So this is like from an early version. You later were able to add those for the demo, and then of course also for the game. This was previously completely forbidden in Germany, whether those were historically accurate games, serious games such as yours, or whether they were entertainment games like Wolfenstein. Those symbols had to be replaced. No longer. It is now possible to sort of apply for a standard age rating, even though these symbols and certain names are there as well. So that was really interesting. That was something that your project really achieved or sort of paved the way for. Jörg, how important a symbol was that with your demo and then the game, this was possible?
We didn't do much, first of all. There was something that just happened to us, kind of, and we were lucky enough then to get all the fuss. but it was very important to us. We were very happy that this rule of the USK changed, because because before we had to we had to think a lot about how to show certain scenes, right? Also, I have to admit that we were very naive in the beginning, and we thought we just leave out the swastika like in the trailer, so we just leave it out and then we're good. But we then had to learn with this Gamescom demo that this is not enough, but basically whenever, for example, someone makes the Hitler salute in the game, that is also an unconstitutional symbol, and because you must not have any unconstitutional symbols in your game, having someone making the Hitler salute would mean you don't get an H rating and so on. So so that would have meant that we would have to jump through a lot of loops, and we did actually for the demo. We had, for that Gamescom demo, we had a version where we had removed everything, which was very painful, and also gave us a lot of headache on how to proceed and how to develop this game in the end, how to tell the story. I always compare this to a writer, basically. So basically you have a writer and you try to tell a historical story about the Third Reich. And they tell you, okay, you must not say Hitler, you must not say this. They take away all the words, they take away all the phrases. And of course you can do this, but it's gonna be so much effort and bind so much creative energy in still trying to convey and tell like this story when you can't use the symbols, and so this was, yeah, a great relief for us.
At this point, Catharina, let's bring you in, because using those symbols is something that apparently just right now got you and My Child Lebensborn into some trouble with either Apple or Google or both, I believe.
Yeah, so using swastika and also the use of Nazi in any form seemed to be like an automatic ban from Google Play in France, Russia, and Germany. I mean, we've been banned before and then gone through and kind of explained how this should work, and you know, that it's not used in any like positive way. But it just seems like they just have this automatic ban stick, and you have to use so much time and effort to get them to get the game back up, and you've already lost traction. So that it really sucks, because it does make us think like, oh, maybe we should have avoided using those symbols. But I don't think that, you know, that's necessarily the best way to handle that.
But currently the game is not available on the Google Marketplace in certain countries.
Yeah, that's correct.
On the Google Play
I mean,
Store.
we would be able to go through and get it up again, but again, like small team, limited budget, it's just so much work.
Of course. Well, now that we've had a look at all three games now, let's move on and answer some of these great questions. Once again, thank you all for participating. Fiona alluded to what I said before, that like while it would have been very easy to paint a black and white picture, particularly wrestling with the Holocaust and the Nazi reign and occupation of large parts of Europe. It would have been very easy to paint a black and white picture of heroes, victims. So she wants to know how people in general, how users reacted to the depiction of more complex characters, challenging perhaps stereotypical and easier narratives of heroes and victims, and also how historians reacted to the very thought of being able to play history, making history interactive and putting history into video games. Very broad questions, but if all three of you could perhaps find a quick answer.
Yeah, so when it comes to the character, I mean, child, I guess children do have some stereotypes. When writing the child, of course, there's the stories of Lebensborn children, but also I just have an insanely vivid memory of being a child myself. So adding in personal experiences and feelings that you would have as a child in any specific situation. I think being confronted with a child that isn't just this selfish Tamagotchi who's like, oh, feed me, give me stuff, but a kid that actually cares for you as well and have their own complex worldviews, that was incredibly powerful for people. And to the player, like, you know, seeing that the child does have, I think it helped, like, one aspect, the child is alive for the team, for the players. That is not just a character more, it is a live person, right? And when you write things and you write stories, these characters come alive. What this child also has is an emotional system that I, as a designer, cannot control at any point. And that makes them more alive as well. And I think these type of things, yeah, it's just very important. And even though it's more challenging, I definitely think that it helps with getting a bigger reception and people talking about it more.
You actually generally had a really good reception, both from audience and from historians, and somewhat to our surprise, because we were kind of ready for historical critique, exactly for the reasons you mentioned, and it didn't really materialize. And I think it's again in its complexity that, like, in our game we show you also heroes. You know, they are not only it's not only the ambiguity. There are still like the classical hero stories, and essentially it's like you see the complexity and the like wide range of very different personal experiences. One thing which was interesting from the reaction was that so many players told us two things. One was where you talk, you know, for example, to your grandma, to this old lady, and then you see the comics, the graphic novel. And I was like, I kind of like, now I realized that she was, you know, in her, I don't know, 18 or 19 when during the war. She was kind of my age, and she went through, you know, like normal stuff as I do. And second thing was quite a lot of players reported that after playing the game, they go to their grandparents or parents and they ask them about the past. They ask them not necessarily about the war, because that's kind of and unfortunately not that many people among us who have memories of the Second War, but they talk about, you know, about the 50s or about the communist times with their grandparents. And that was something very that was something like really we found surprising and awesome, that, you know, our game kind of can be the platform for asking questions about your own family history.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we are sometimes we are not that ambiguous, I would say, because, and that is for a reason, because that also had to do with the perspective that we wanted to show, right? We wanted to tell the story from the eyes of a resistance fighter, so from a person who decided to risk her own life to fight the regime in that time. And that means that this comes with a certain stance, right? And this comes with a certain perspective and view on things, and on also people that represent these parts. So so this is where we're very clear. So like, what is the stance of the people in your group, or of your own character you play, even though there are different palettes. However, we still try to tell the story of, like, hey, most Germans were not resistance fighters. The great majority was actually pro-Hitler and was supporting this regime. And so you meet this family, for example, early on, and that are your neighbors, and you experience how they grow up, how the sons join the Hitlerjugend, how much they love it, how they join the army, how they believe in the war, and everything is great. Or there's this mother that has no husband and is trying to raise her son, and she's also a big fan of the regime and has a career opportunity there. And like all these, you meet all these people, or your boss, or your former party member from a social democratic party or church members and so on. So we tried to give a bigger picture by you meeting all these people while still having a clear position on where your own character is at and who is the hero in a way, or the protagonist at least.
One thing, like when it comes to historians, like people who don't know much about games were, of course, really skeptical. But then as we were explaining the background, how we were working with the story, how we wanted to be true to the social situation in Norway at the time, and especially to the children's stories, gave them peace of mind. And after that, on seeing the impact and potential of the game, they became quite excited actually and started wanting to give us more ideas of things we could do. So.
Excellent. Thank you all for your answers, and thanks, Fiona, for the question. Before we go further with questions from the audience, I would like to sort of take a moment here to address put some perspective on this. All three games that we've just seen that you bring to the table deal with the Nazi reign of terror in Europe in a unique and respectful way that really gives you an emotional response. But only about 10 years ago, similar video game projects were proposed, but never came to fruition because they were heavily criticized simply for being video games. And I think that's something that we should talk about in a space of just 10 years. Projects like your three projects are allowed to flourish and come to fruition and actually, meet hundreds, thousands, and more players and affect them. But in 2013, there was like I think a German game programmer tried to sort of put the Diary of Anne Frank into a video game. It was heavily criticized, never happened. There was a French video game developer who proposed a project called Imagination is the Only Escape. I think Luc Bernard is his name, which was to tell the story of like the Nazi occupation of France through the eyes of a Jewish child who had to escape and essentially escape the Holocaust. Again, heavily criticized, and it just never happened. So what has changed in these? I mean, this was only 2013. It's not that long ago, barely 10 years ago. What has changed since then that really made your projects possible at all? Was it publishers willing to fund projects now? Was it the society sort of owing up to the fact that video games are a more inclusive medium and serious games are more viable than they did 8, 9, 10 years ago? What changed, if you can pinpoint it?
I just feel more gamers grew up and became decision makers. And at one point, the scale tips over from people who know what it is and how impactful it can actually be. So yeah, I think just time. I mean, people used to think that the radio was a horrible medium that would ruin families. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's probably the time, and like also video games gained much more culture prestige now. Like now it's all these exhibitions and festivals and like serious media kind of talking about video games and writing video game reviews. So it kind of really stopped being kind of teenage entertainment or something. So it's like simply different perception of the media. The medium kind of changed and matured. I would say there is today games are much more versatile and like heterogeneous. Like we can find so many different games on different topics. So it's yeah, I think it's a kind of like change in public perception.
Yeah, not much to add there. That's exactly what happened. Mainly time and yes, with that public perception. that made it more acceptable. And there is more games. I think there were more games pushing the boundaries of what games can be about. And when people were learning about that, they lost a little bit the fear of the medium.
But Jörg, I think you have something unique to contribute to this question in particular, because your game, when it came out, I mean, it was almost unanimously praised and continues to be so. But there was also some criticism. For instance, the German family minister said very sort of this was sort of carried by a lot of media. She said, you shouldn't play with swastikas, until you actually managed to show the game to her, and she actually changed her mind and endorsed the game afterwards. But still, like, some sort of general criticism remained. I believe the Israeli ambassador to Berlin had tweeted about the game, particularly focusing on the fact that swastikas were allowed to be used in it. And basically it says that this just shouldn't be, full stop. I presume that he hasn't seen the individual game. So talk us through how you dealt with this criticism that you met, and particularly interesting, how did the family minister, how did she change her opinion from the stance that video games shouldn't be allowed to do this at all to actually endorsing the game?
Yeah, I mean, most of this came because of the swastika debate, right? It was not so much about the topic of the game, but it was about the change of swastikas being allowed in games in Germany, and that was what caused the outrage, because some people thought that now there will be all hell break loose, and there will be swastikas everywhere in video games and on YouTube and Facebook and whatnot. Yeah, so what we did was we were very outspoken. We reached out. We tried to reach out to everyone. We wrote open letters to the family ministry and to the unions and to the Israeli ambassador as well. And a lot actually reacted, and that was really nice. We were able to, yeah, as I said, like Franziska Giffey then came on Gamescom, because she was at Gamescom anyway, and then she came to our booth, and we were able to show her the game, and she saw what it was about and what our approach was, and then basically made a public statement of like, okay, in this case, this is actually okay. And yeah, so that was pretty good. And same with the unions, the German Deutsche Gewerkschaftsbund, so the biggest German union or main union, I don't know. And they invited us, Sebastian and me, and we had a 2 hours discussion with them, showed them the game, and explained them why we think it's the right decision to show these symbols. We couldn't convince them, but I think both sides went out with a better understanding why each side thinks it needs to be that way. And so yeah. And also, I think what's important is this was all a big fuss in the autumn of 2018. And since then, a lot of games came actually out, and most games came out before us, like Attentat 1941, for example, which was the first game that had then the first released game with the swastikas in it. And also the games where people were worried about that, like shooters like Wolfenstein, came out with showing these symbols, and it feels like no one is really that worried anymore. It's just people accept it, and also it hasn't changed. There are no swastikas everywhere in children's rooms still, and I think society has survived.
Yes, absolutely. The worst fears of the critics certainly have not materialized. That is true. If we look at the time, unfortunately, we've only got 10 minutes left, which is really sad, as we are unsure whether we can carry on this session beyond past. It might be timed on Zoom. We'll try and extend it if we can. But let's assume that we only have 10 minutes left, unfortunately. What we desperately need to talk about is financing. Games such as your 3 games are pedagogically important games that a number of questions have already come up that they should be used in the classroom, and I believe a lot of your games already are and were developed with classroom play in mind. But so you have support by you have government funding. You sometimes some of your projects are actually aligned with sort of like with the ministries in your respective countries. So please. Can you tell us a little bit about what support you got from the game, but also whether games like yours could be economically viable just by themselves? Jörg, for instance, your game, I believe, very late in the process, you got a publisher, but the game was practically finished by that time, I think. So was it really important? Was it necessary to for all 3 of you to have a publisher? Vít, your game is like a university project. Would these all have been economically viable if they had been purely commercial projects?
Well, for us, the game kind of is a pure, or when we did it, because, you know, I do games business, it was a purely commercial project that we're just being very careful with. But in Norway, we do get funds for making like cultural or narrative projects, and it wouldn't have been possible to do it without it, because we couldn't get a publisher, because this was a strange thing for premium mobile. But we have been able to prove that this is indeed very economically viable. And I don't think people should, you know, the game itself can do really well, and ours has done really well. But of course, the funding part of it is really difficult. So if our country didn't have this cultural funds that a lot of the indie game developers here in Norway depend on, then this game wouldn't exist.
Yeah, it's similar for us. It is through the Dark Souls times, it has been a commercial project and has been treated like this. But we could start it because we got some funding from the Berlin Median Board. Yeah, without that, it wouldn't have been possible. But also without the publisher, it would have been very hard. It was not finished when indie games came in. They funded a lot of the production and helped us big time with distribution as well. Yeah, I think it's still, I mean, in the end, it has been commercially not super successful, but viable, and it can be a blueprint for other games or doing more like this, and we're also continuing down that road. But yeah, as Katharina said, the initial funding is hard, especially if you're not, and I mean, private investors, you can understand private investors, they want to invest in stuff that is either proven to make money, or it sounds super risky, but if it succeeds, it will make a lot of money. And games are usually none of this, especially these kind of games. So having some kind of public funding that in a way helps to bring the game to a point where it then can convince private investors like publishers of like, hey, look at this. It's kind of cool, is it not? We showed it to players, they also like it, what do you think? Then I think it will be hard. And it's good that these funds exist.
Yeah, our story is, I think, very similar. Like Attentat 942 was developed at Charles University and the Czech Academy of Sciences. And in the beginning, we got some initial financial support from the Czech Ministry of Culture. Then we actually self-published the game. We had no publisher. The game was completely indie from the point. And the game was actually kind of successful and viable, and won so many awards, and even like brought some economic success, that actually the university, based on these games, based solely on the success of Attentat and 42, university actually decided to establish a spin-off, Charles Games. So now I'm actually talking not only from position of Charles University, but we have like I think it's the first university game development studio in Czech Republic, established by university. So Charles Games, named after the Emperor Charles IV. And we have like more games in the pipeline, and it's again, we are like co-owned by the university, and we are very closely working with the university, especially with the mathematical physical faculty, where there are game development courses and game design courses. And Charles Games is like, first we develop our own games, you know, which should be commercially successful in the market, and then we serve kind of as an incubator for promising teams of student developers. And we have some very interesting projects in pipeline now. So we are kind of still in this private-public partnership. And
I think we should spend the last few minutes of the time we know we have for sure. If we are unable to extend it, we will try. We should spend talking about the way forward for games with historical content. And I was wondering what you thought would be the most interesting developments. Would they be technological? Will VR, for instance, as a technology, enable different experiences that perhaps center less on gameplay mechanics, but more on living the moment and witnessing something more passively? Will AAA games, the big blockbuster productions, will they be able to contribute? I mean, there are series like Assassin's Creed that tackle with history. We're going to talk in more detail, had we more time, about a game called 6 Days in Fallujah, where they try to recreate in a very realistic, photorealistic setting the infamous battle in the Iraqi war. What do you think is sort of the way forward for including history in video games, all three of you?
Well, I think it's a little bit difficult to know. Like, I don't necessarily. I think VR will help us look at different ways that we can connect with players and just broaden the scope of interactivity. I mean, I think, for instance, AR games as well does that, and we kind of, the more we realize that we can do with people's actions and with their views and how we can play on the different limitations that certain platforms give, but also, you know, the freedoms that they have that others don't have. Like, I don't think the future, personally for me, is in just one thing and that it would kind of explode in one way, but I think the way that games will emerge more will be that it just probably will jump over into many different ways of interaction. I mean, even just if it's like, for instance, live role-playing or anything like that, like there's so many things you can do, and I think the different technologies will just give us different challenges, and that will inspire artists in different ways.
Yep, I would say definitely I'm really looking forward to the future of games, because I love games, and I especially love games with stories. And I think now there's a huge progress in technology and visual realism of various historical games. I'm really looking forward to games that include also more social realism, you know, which will like not only tell you how things very accurately looked like in the past, but how people lived and, you know, how they felt. So they've kind of like in the story and in the game mechanics, there will be more kind of realism. These are games from any period I would love to play.
Yeah, that's also what I'm not even so interested in like the technological progress that will certainly happen. Yet I think what I'm looking forward to is how we get better at coming up with new ways of telling history and putting it into mechanics and going away from like getting beyond the always same kind of couple of mechanics of I don't know, shooting and commanding when it comes to historical topics, but more telling more personal stories. And what I'm pretty sure will happen is that that this will become a topic not only for small developers, but also like the big studios will take a close look at what's happening there in the indie area and pick whatever fits to them, and they will become better games as well. The other part that I'm expecting is, or that's already happening, is that that games will become a part of conveying history for museums and memorials, just as books and movies are already. I think that might be partially because of Corona, but also in general, we had this before already, that a lot of museums and memorials now reach out. I guess Katharina and Vít always also experienced this, and are looking for studios that would make games for them. And it's a very slow process, and it's still young and fresh and difficult, but I'm sure it will happen and will become more more common, and we'll just get used to see games for this kind of commemoration as well.
Yeah, I suppose, and your three projects are the best examples of that. As you can see, we're already in extra time. It is 6:31 p.m. and we haven't yet been cut off. But in case, just for technical reasons, we are, please allow me to sort of say my closing remarks before then answering as many of your great questions as we possibly can. So let's pretend we will be cut off technically, unfortunately. Let me thank all of you three participants for joining this debate, everyone in the audience, and particularly those who've asked great questions. I hope we can all answer them satisfactorily. Of course, great thanks to GamesNet Berlin Europe and MediaNet for organizing this event, particularly to Florian Mazut, but also Jörn Leuer and Inke Breuning. So thanks so much for everything to the project team. And I would just like to add like this little emotional thought of mine, that simply us four here and people from Venezuela and many other countries all over the globe talking about this only 75 years after the end of the Second World War is a fantastic sign of how the world has come back together after the topic we're discussing here, after the Second World War and the atrocities the Nazis have committed. To be able to talk between Norwegians, Czech and Germans and many other peoples without hatred and all pulling in the same direction, that's a fantastic and heartwarming thought. So thank you to everyone, and here we are in DLC time, and we'll, if you're all good to go, I think we should definitely honor Alexander, Piotr, Jesus, all the people who have commented and asked further questions. Alexander asked whether the games were specifically designed to be played in the classroom, and whether they are made available to educational organizations, to schools. What's it like for you, Jörg? Is the game being played in classrooms in Germany? Are you making that available?
So it is played in classrooms by teachers who pick it up and somehow integrate it in their lessons. However, at the moment there is no particular, like no special way for schools to license the game. That might change in the future, but might be far future. And it wasn't designed to be played in the classroom. Honestly, it wasn't. It was designed as a game. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a historian. I'm a game developer. Always have been, and yeah. But it has been picked up a lot, and apparently it works.
So I mean, for me, games are inherently educational. People just don't think of it. So for me, for it to be a learning or teaching kind of game, I mean, the main goal is for it to be an educational, impactful experience, right? But Technopilot did always want to make this game for schools as well. So Technopilot has invested in an educational version, which is called Child Lebensborn Edu, which is now being tested for schools. So the game itself is an experience that you play on your own, but then adding additional things to that, making it so that, okay, well, you've gone through this experience now, this and this part. Okay, let's as a class talk about this, and in that way, it's being used in schools in Norway, testing now. But I mean, in general, we got so much positive feedback from teachers just about the story and the topic, and some of the teachers kind of going, I love games, I want to use games when I teach. So there's a few, we're really lucky because there's a few like Norwegian teachers who also are gamers. And so they've just sat down and made curriculums so that non-gamer teachers can be taught how to use the game in class, even without like the educational version. So stuff like that's like great of teachers themselves saying, okay, I know that like maybe this game hasn't been made to be used in a classroom for teachers who don't really know games, but I can create kind of a tutorial for teachers how to use it because I see how it is being educational. So I think teaming up with teachers is going to be really important, maybe in the future for games as well.
And Vít, I'm very interested in how you're going to answer the question, because your game was basically developed in a classroom, well, a university classroom rather.
Well, actually, Attentat 1942 is like a commercial game, which is just there, you know, to be a game for everybody. But there is a specific educational version, which is only in Czech, which is kind of like it was the very early version of the game, which, yeah, was developed like for classrooms, and it's actually used by Czech high schools, actually. And we now have a special, again, curriculum even for Attentat and 42, developed by US historian. And we know that the game is actually used in some university courses in the US, Poland, even I think Spain and Norway. So we have like very positive feedback. But the game which is on Steam is, yeah, it's just a game for everybody.
Excellent. So that exhaustively answers the question. Thank you. Piotr has asked us some time ago already about the game, not just those three games, not just aiming at younger generations, but how these games can possibly use their pedagogical strength in order to reach elderly people. Did you three have any feedback from what now is called silver gamers, perhaps elderly people that actually played your games? Or do you think video games are a medium to reach people 35 and below?
Oh no, yeah, the games are definitely for elders. I grew up with grandparents that would sit and play Mario. So I think for Child Lebensborn, it works pretty well because you are a parent taking care of a child. So that works for children, that works for adults, that works for older adults as well. And I actually think because Child Lebensborn is on the mobile and is relatively easy to use, although kids definitely pick up on the Tamagotchi gameplay faster than pensioners, it's still a game that they feel that they can play. And I think all of our games really maybe, okay, the strategy is can be a little bit tricky for, well, I wouldn't exactly say that it has anything to do with age, maybe more just how much they've been exposed to games. But I think our type of game is kind of narrative games where there's not that much like stress and things that have to go on, and it's a really good like gateway, I think, for the non-gamers.
The oldest, our oldest player I know of was a woman born 1931. Who sent us an email. She was playing the game with her son. I was like my age. So that and liked the game. So that was that made me happy. That the game apparently works for this generation as well. I would say we're a little bit more on the hardcore side than my Child Lebensborn and Attentat, but still we tried intentionally to keep the game kind of accessible to people who are not playing a lot of video games by using mechanics that are, if you're used to play a board game, you might still be able to get through the game. And apparently it seemed to work.
You actually know about a few, like typically parents playing with their kids or grandparents playing with their grandkids, so they came together. And yeah, as I said, oftentimes commenting on their own kind of memories from childhood or from that time or all the time. So we know that's happening, but don't have any like specific data about our oldest players.
Did you finish, or we just had a little bit of a sound glitch there, Vít?
Oh, that's all.
All right. Okay. Sorry. Right. Okay. It just ended on a glitch. Excellent. Well, then we'll turn to Jesus' question. And he asks, what do you three think is the relation between video game and history? Again, a question we've already tackled before, and we could write books about, I think. And secondly, can a video game be considered a product and an agent of history, as Mark Farrow once said about the cinema and history? I have to admit that I'm not aware of this this work, but perhaps you are, if anyone would like to answer Jesus' question.
The way I understand it is whether games not only document history but also shape it, and by basically the way they portray it, they change our view on history. And I would say that is definitely true, and that is that was one of the things that is true for all media. I mean, it's even true for your grandparents telling you about their experiences. This will shape your view on history, right? So this for us was a big motivation to make Through the Darkest of Times, because we thought there is a lack here of what games portray currently when it comes to this part of history.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's I think I mentioned it in the beginning. I think that historical video games might become in the 21st century what historical books and historical movies were in the 20th century. They might be the dominant form of popular history, like the dominant media form from which you get your mental model of various historical periods and events, and that of course affects your behavior and decisions. So yeah.
And yeah, games as a medium, of course, like any medium, will take inspiration from everything that happens and from what we learn and how we learn it and when we learn it. So I definitely think that they do affect each other in a very strong way.
Excellent. There was one other question that, Catharina, I think that you answered by means of comments, which was what your three, each of your favorite video games were that tackled history, presumably other than your own video games. And I think that will be a good point to end on, because it's very brief, and it sort of like wraps it up. Gives it sort of like a second ending. We had so much more prepared. We had other trailers we would have liked to shown, but thanks to the overwhelming audience participation, that wasn't possible. So why don't you just like name one or perhaps a few video games other than your own that deal with history and that you think are significant, and perhaps a suggestion for the audience to carry forward.
I have to say, though, I think most game developers probably don't like their own game as much, but just because it's theirs. But my two favorite are This War of Mine. It's a really great game. Have to try it. It's depressing as heck. And then a 3-minute long experience, which I cannot stop raging about, which is called A Brief History of Cambodia, made by someone calling themselves Games Trekking. And you just find it on a website, and it's free. And it's just a crazy experience that it has inspired me so much.
For me, it's definitely This War of Mine. That's a clear mention. And then actually not a game about history, but a game with amazing take on a historical setting. That's actually Spec Ops: The Line. Kudos to Jörg.
Thank you very much. I would just join the club and say This War of Mine is definitely a great game that inspired me a lot, and is both a good game and a fantastic take on a scenario. I would also say Papers, Please is a great game, which is a really tiny game that was for me a great inspiration on how you can tell about a bigger world scenario from a very limited perspective. And then there's a game called Path Out, which is a little adventure game where you play a Syrian refugee. Basically retells the story. It's based on a true story, and tells the story of a refugee going from Syria to Europe. Yeah.
That's actually a self-biographical game.
Yes.
Made by the game developer.
Yeah.
Ah, excellent. I see some links in the chat for anyone who wants to trace that up. So here we are at the very end of things. This is a bit like the Lord of the Rings, you know, the sort of the ending of the ending of the ending. But this is the final one, unfortunately. Once again, I would like to thank all three of you for participating and for going well into extra time with us. Thank you ever so much for your time and for sharing those insights with us. Three outstanding games and outstanding studios. So thank you so much. Thanks to the audience and for your participation. And once again, to all the organizers I already named, just in case we would have been automatically cut off. Luckily we weren't, but things come to a natural end. So thank you ever so much, all of you involved. And having had so much more that we prepared to talk about and to show you, perhaps we will see you here in a similar constellation or the same one, who knows, for a follow-up. Certainly there's a lot to talk about. So I'm sure in one form or another, we will tackle this topic again, hopefully with all or some of you. Thank you ever so much from Frankfurt, Germany, and have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.